there, welcome to What's Cooking at the Capitol with me. I'm Adam Mason. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the State Policy Organizing Director at Iowa CCI Action Fund. I want to thank you for joining me today as we test out something new here at CCI Action. We're giving you a broadcast today about what's been cooking at the Iowa State Capitol, and I'm actually going to share a recipe with you along the way. So thank you for joining me. I'm going to ask you right now to go ahead and give us the bumps and the shares. I think that's what all the kids are saying these days. It helps us reach more people and engage more Iowans who, like you, care about these very important issues. So today, we're going to talk about what is cooking at the Iowa Capitol. We're 2 weeks into the state legislative session. I'm also going to be sharing a recipe for moussaka. Now, if you don't know what moussaka is, but you do know what lasagna is, that's great. Moussaka is essentially a Greek version of lasagna, and we're going to swap out eggplant instead of using noodles. But I'll get to that in a second. What we're going to cover over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so is what the GOP has been cooking up at the Iowa Capitol. We're going to talk about our priorities at Iowa CCI Action Fund. And we're also going to talk about bills that have already been introduced at the Iowa State House so far in the first 2 weeks of this legislative session. And I'll give you a preview as we launch into next week, what's coming at the Capitol and what we're going to be cooking up at Iowa CCI Action. So again, thank you for joining us. And let's talk a little bit about moussaka. So I mentioned that it's basically a lasagna with eggplant and Greek seasonings. You can make it with lamb. That's the kind of the traditional. You can also make it with beef. Today, I'm going to be using venison. I've got a neighbor who harvests extra deer and always likes to give me one. I always appreciate that. So we're going to be using local harvested deer. If I was getting ready to really cook everything right now, I'd be broiling the eggplant slices in the oven. I'm just going to be prepping my meat sauce. So that's what we're going to watch through today. Now, what's cooking up at the Iowa Capitol? Well, that's a different story, okay? As we know, the Iowa GOP is in complete control. They've got the governor's office and both chambers of the State House. They are setting the rules this legislative session, and because of that, no masks are required at the Iowa Capitol. That's not good. Now, they have agreed to webcast most of their committee hearings and subcommittee hearings, and debate. That is good. We want to be able to see what's going on at the Iowa Capitol. But unfortunately, in the House, that means that you actually have to show up if you care to testify at a subcommittee meeting. That prevents a barrier for anybody like us who wants to protect their health and their community from actually weighing in on this in person. Now, of course, we can email and make phone calls. Those are valuable tools that we have. But it is an obvious barrier that the House Republicans are using to silence public debate on this. In fact, in a shot of good news on this, our friends over at the AFL-CIO actually yesterday filed an OSHA complaint against House and Senate Republicans for creating an unsafe workspace. Right on. Now, what we've seen so far is a lot of bills. Usually in the first 2 weeks of the session, they go through their speeches in the first week. They do initial committee meetings, things like that. But this year, they seem to be moving at a much faster clip. In just the first 2 weeks, we've seen 494 bills introduced between the both chambers so far. That's over double what we normally see. We might see about 2,000 legislative bills in a normal session. Right now, we're on pace for over 3,000. So what that tells me is that they've really got their burners set to high up at the Capitol. They want to move and cook quick and really kind of run through as quickly as they can. We do have some legislative timelines. The first funnel, when a bill must pass out of committee, is on March 5th. The second funnel, when a bill must pass at least one chamber and a committee in the opposing chamber, is April 2nd, and they're scheduled to end the session by April 30th. So that's kind of the timeline we're looking at. I'm going to check my venison here. I'm going to spread it out a little bit, and I'm just going to turn up the heat a bit, okay? All righty. So what we've been seeing so far. Here at CCI, we're not pie in the sky folks, although I do love pie. We're going into this legislative session with realistic expectations. We know that with complete Republican control, a lot of our priorities we're going to be fighting for tooth and nail to get a hearing on. And what we are actually seeing in terms of policies at the Capitol tells us as much as what we're not seeing, right? Initial bills from the Republican Party include 3 different versions of the death penalty, multiple bills addressing abortion, lots of bills, including a constitutional amendment on guns. Now, this is a lot of red meat for their base, right? This is what we always hear out of the right, talk about guns, abortion, and death penalty. We've also seen lots of bills on education, which is a big priority this legislative session. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We're seeing these from both sides of the aisle right now, but there's a definite push, including the governor, to use public money to fund private schools through what they're calling choice vouchers. Now, we know that this is nothing more than an attempt to strip away local control from our public school systems. And if this is an issue that's important to you, I'd encourage you to get in touch with any number of parents groups that are weighing in on this, and of course, the teachers union, who we rely on for good information. A couple other examples of some bad bills that we're tracking. Just this week, we saw a bill that was introduced. We're cooking. Folks that are low income, to do their cooking, they need food stamps and SNAP and other safety net policies that we support. A bill was introduced this week to root out fraud through the food stamp program. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think there's probably a lot of fraud going on there. And if folks need those safety net programs, maybe we should be focused on providing a living wage and healthcare for all instead of trying to give them a criminal record. That's just me. We've also seen a recurring bill that we see every year, a bill called E-Verify, to crack down on what's perceived as undocumented folks. But again, these kind of punitive policies are not what we want at CCI. We believe Iowa should be a welcoming place. And we've seen lots of bills about policing in the wake of the struggle for racial justice and in response to police violence that we've seen in the last year. We knew that this would be a big issue, but what we're seeing from the right is not the kind of reforms that we need. One other quick heads up, as I add a little bit of onion here to my meat sauce, is that we know that this year is a redistricting year for Iowa, as it is for every state across the country. And of course, Iowa has the best recipe for redistricting. It's nonpartisan. Legislators can vote up or down on the proposals that a nonpartisan committee puts together. We try not to break up counties for our rural areas. And we don't draw those funny looking districts that look like a messed up chili pepper. As much as possible, we try and follow straight borders. Because of the delay in the census this year, it's likely that Republicans will have to convene a special session this summer to approve Iowa's redistricting plan. We're going to keep our eye on that because whenever they have to do that, something smells kind of fishy. That's not something I want to cook with, okay? A lot about what we've seen so far. I'm going to pivot for a second to tell you about what we wanted. What are the ingredients that make up the social justice recipe that we're fighting for at CCI? You might have already seen it, but on the first and second day of the legislative session, when Governor Kim Reynolds gave her her condition of the state address, we issued our plan for $1 billion pandemic relief fund. That sounds like a lot. That's a lot of cheddar, right? Sounds like it. But actually, it's exactly what our communities need. It includes free COVID testing for all Iowans and rapid vaccination programs. It includes increased funding for our public schools, right? Not a tax and not funneling money out of our public schools, actually increasing funding for our public schools. It means increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour for workers. It means increasing food assistance and childcare assistance for those who are struggling to get by in these tough times. It means making sure that everyone has a roof over their head and preventing foreclosures. It means that we want parity and strong supports for rural Iowans who are out there struggling to make ends meet. It means that we need to ban racial profiling so that folks aren't, having to deal with cash bail or no-knock warrants by police. And of course, it means that our local law enforcement cannot continue serving as ICE. Now, like I said, $1 billion, that's a lot of cheddar, right? But we know where the money is. And it is in closing corporate tax loopholes. Just by ending the corporate tax breaks and subsidies that our state continues to hand out as part of their business as usual plans, that's $500 million a year right there. Legalizing marijuana would bring in over $100 million in new tax revenue. And of course, if we look at the state's reserves and last year's surplus of over $300 million, we know that we have the money to invest in communities. So that gets us to our other priorities at Iowa CCI. Let me check real quick on how this meat sauce is doing. All right. Got some good browning action going on. And in a second, I'm going to add some tomatoes here, get a nice simmer going on that. Those are tomatoes that I canned from the garden last year. Really looking forward to that. One other reason that I picked moussaka today is actually because it's got some great spices in it. I don't know how familiar you are with Greek cooking, but cinnamon often ends up in Greek cooking. And cinnamon is one of those spices that just kind of, especially when it's cold outside, it warms me up, whether it's, apple cider, cinnamon rolls kind of is what you think of. Cinnamon tends to be a good use in Greek cooking. So that's one of the reasons I picked that recipe today. So in terms of what our priorities were, I laid out our $1 billion relief plan. Of course, what that means is that we've got a lot of work to do. We know that we are going to have to turn the heat up on a lot of these legislators just to get a subcommittee hearing on our priorities. Fortunately, our allies have been introducing our bills, and if you sign up for our emails, you'll get an email from us every Monday with a bill tracker. Of those 500 bills I mentioned that have been introduced so far, we flagged about 100 that we are tracking, and about 40 that we are tracking very, very closely. Every Monday, we'll send you an email with a bill tracker, including actions that you can take. And that means emailing your legislator in support of good bills we've already seen for Medicare for All and unprivatizing Medicaid servicing here in Iowa. We're building support and lining up co-sponsors. You can email your legislator in support of the factory farm moratorium bill that will be introduced in early February during part of our week of action then. And of course, there's lots of opportunity. We're seeing more action at the federal level, but we've seen some great bills here in Iowa to make sure that more Iowans are voting and that our elections are accessible to all people. We truly believe that every voter counts and every vote should be counted. So there's lots of great policies like automatic voter registration that we're supporting, as well as expanding the period when folks can get absentee ballots. So I'm going to go ahead and add that tomato sauce in there. Very good. I'm going to add in a little bit of garlic here. I don't know how much garlic you like. I tend to like a lot of it, but I know some people don't like that strong. You can always tweak a recipe to make it your own. I view the recipe as kind of my guide. So just let me tell you a little bit more about that. As soon as this sauce is done cooking, I'm going to layer my eggplant with the meat sauce, just like you would a lasagna. I'm going to throw in a little bit of yogurt and egg mixture to kind of solidify it a lot. And then I'm going to throw some mozzarella cheese on top. When all of that's done, I'm going to throw it in the oven and bake it for about 40 minutes. And tonight, I'll be waiting for you to come over and have some with me. So where we're going to end up right now is, we've got a lot of work to do. And on one of those issues specifically, you heard me mention policing and racial justice issues. Now, we are working with a number of legislators to make sure that the ban on racial profiling that has been started here in the city of Des Moines is extended to all of our state's communities. We need a statewide ban on racial profiling. The first bill on that was introduced this week. Last week, we saw a bill to mandate body cameras for all law enforcement officers around the state. And we know that another bill to ban racial profiling is coming as well. But you also heard me mention that there's been a lot of bills to protect police, specifically to prevent local law enforcement agencies from firing or cracking down on officers that are involved in police violence. Those are what we're going to be watching and kind of fighting against as we fight for this ban on racial profiling that we need. We're going to dig in on this a lot more next week when a CCI member who's been fighting on this issue for over 4 years joins us, and we'll see what we're cooking up next week. But she'll join me to kind of dig in on these racial justice issues and help us kind of sniff out what's good and what's bad about all of the different policing racial justice action that we're seeing at the State House. So again, I'm asking you to share this with your friends. We want to reach more people as we discuss what's cooking at the Capitol. I want you to sign up if you're not already getting CCI Action updates. I'm asking you to sign up for our emails at CCI Action so you can get our weekly update with that awesome bill tracker. It'll highlight key committee hearings that you might want to tune in for. It will give you action steps that you can take when your email or your call can have a really big impact to move this Planet People and Planet First agenda forward. And of course, we'll be back again next week to share another recipe. So set a reminder to tune in when we talk about what's cooking at the Capitol with me, Adam.